everyone. Welcome back to Grief Out Loud. I'm your host, Janet Cristofaro. When we talk about grief, most of the time, we imagine deep sadness and longing for the person who died. But what happens when the person who died was also someone who was abusive and caused harm? For Kathy, her dad's death when she was 11 brought not only confusion, but also an overwhelming sense of relief. Kathy went on to become a social worker and now volunteers with teens and tweens who are grieving. In our conversation, Kathy shares openly about carrying the secret of sexual abuse during her childhood, what it was like to have a parent die who caused so much harm, and how volunteering gave her a sense of purpose and visibility at a very young age. She also reflects on what she's learned from the teens that she works with about the importance of making space for the complicated, messy, and sometimes contradictory feelings that come with grief. A couple of notes before we begin. Content-wise, this episode includes references to childhood sexual abuse. Language-wise, there's a little bit of salty language. So please take care of yourself while listening. And finally, sound quality-wise, Kathy's audio is a little bit muddy in the first minute or two, but I promise it gets a lot better as you go on. Okay. Here's our conversation. Kathy, welcome to the show. I'm so glad we can have this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
We usually start with the personal, but I'm wondering if you could actually start with sharing a little bit about your professional and your volunteer connection to working with grief.
Well, my professional history is I'm a social worker for over probably 38 years, something like that. And I didn't work only in the grief field, but recently have been working more and more with grief. And I happened to be working at a teen program, Elizabeth Hospice in San Diego, that works with teens and tweens, and started listening to the episodes and realizing that my story actually I don't think is very often told. So my dad died when I was 11, and probably within 6 months of that time is when I started doing volunteer work somehow. And I really, truly can't remember how I did it. I just know I rode my bike. I found a convalescent home, probably less than a half a mile from my house. And somehow I asked them if I could volunteer. And they said yes. And so that was the start of me being, I really kind of would say a social worker. I think when I was preparing for this, I realized I think I wasn't visible, and that was a way to be needed and visible, and I had to be somewhere, and they wanted me, and I loved it from the very beginning. And my first person I worked with is Janet. She was 93 years old.
So in a way, we talk a lot about finding purpose or some way to re-engage with life and feeling like life has some meaning. And it seems like volunteering from a very young age was kind of your way of reconnecting to that. I know you mentioned that you were 11 when your dad died. Are there ways that you see reflections of yourself at that age with the tweens and teens that you currently work with?
Yeah, I wrote anger, cluelessness, confusion, not understood, feeling weird, feeling like they're the only ones in the world who lost or had someone in their family die. Just very different, very alone and strange, not part of community. I would say most, if not almost all the kids feel that way.
So like standing out in some way, being isolated, no longer belonging.
Yes, or when they go back to school, that kids don't know how to deal with it. So they will ask them, and we have a kid that still is getting asked like about their mother when their mother's been gone for like a couple of years. So kids who can't relate to that or don't know how to deal with it, or so feeling just very, very different and not being able to relate to kids at school or anywhere else.
I was just thinking, you mentioned when you were 11 and right after your dad died, you just ended up volunteering primarily with folks who were older. I wonder if there's some way that folks who were older had an understanding of grief in a way that peers your own age could not relate to.
I think when thinking about it, I don't know, it was more just that I was visible because I've been talking to my siblings about when my dad died recently and what happened. And I think, the focus was on my mom. And I think not that I don't think they even necessarily knew my dad died. I think they just saw this kid who could help them with bedpans and urinals and, and all that stuff too. And I liked it. I mean, I don't know if I even told them anything. I think it was just kind of a bizarre luck that happened. I don't know if they said, sorry, your dad died. I kind of doubt I said any of that, but I don't know.
Well, take us back to what life was like when you were 11. So, like, leading up to when your dad died, what was going on in your world then?
Well, when I was 11, my two brothers were a lot older than me, so they were both in college. And my sister was a senior in high school, so she was getting ready to go to college the next year. So I lived with my mom and my sister, and I lived in a very nice neighborhood, had friends, had campfire girls, did a really great life from the outside. My dad did sexually abuse me as a child that no one knew about at the time. So I would say that secret and that fear was predominant. And also, I think I kind of knew my parents were having some marital issues right around that time, and which they didn't have for years, or at least overt ones. And so I think it was also a time where my sister was leaving and I'd be the only kid, and just really also not wanting to be around my dad ever, alone for sure.
And your dad was living at home with you all at that point.
And I mean, the rest of my life looked good from the outside and was, great schools, good neighborhood, all that kind of stuff, but not the secret. And that impacted everything pretty much.
So even prior to your dad's death, there's a sense of a part of you being really invisible to the outside world.
Right. Or keeping a secret too. Right. Yeah. So, and it was confusing I think what my siblings tell me now, I have one sibling that passed a couple of years ago, but they said that they couldn't understand why he treated me poorly. And he treated me really like, if I spilled my milk or if I, whatever. So from my perspective, he didn't like me. And from my perspective, I always did something wrong. And it was because, in my mind, as a little kid, it was because I wasn't being consensual. I don't know how to say it any other way. I tried to get away from him. And so I always thought that I was on his bad side, and my siblings never understood that. And I didn't really either. I didn't really connect it other than I just was doing something wrong a lot, I guess.
What was it like, Kathy, to get that perspective from your siblings when you were older, that they saw how he treated you?
I think it's just been lots and lots and lots of pieces of the puzzle helping, like, so that they didn't understand why he treated me so poorly. They didn't understand a lot about my dad because lots of information came out afterwards in terms of prescription drug abuse, all these other things that were going on. So I think, and that took many years to actually get that information, which is part of, I think, the problem, to even understand what was going on in the family at that time. So it took probably many, many years until actually, I think, I shared that I had been abused. That the other stuff came out about my dad's prescription drug abuse, maybe mental health challenges, all that kind of stuff. So I think I helped them in a way because they saw something they never ever knew was part of the history, and then they helped me in terms of putting pieces together too that were pretty obvious. So
there's been a co-creation of this puzzle being put together from you and your siblings.
Puzzle makers who have different different viewpoints of the whole thing too.
How did you get the news that your dad had died?
I was at sixth grade camp, and I didn't like fish. This is really it's because all of a sudden my two brothers came up, and I thought they came to camp so I didn't have to eat fish that day. That was my first thought. And then my second thought was what they told me. I don't remember this, that I said, or our parents getting divorced. And then they said, no, dad died. And then I said, according to them, am I supposed to cry? So that was my reaction. The only other thing I remember was getting a choice of which brother could drive, because I think one of them was a crazier driver. Maybe they gave me a choice of who would drive me home. That's how I heard. And uh, I do not remember feeling incredibly sad. I remember feeling more worried about my mom and would she be kind of totally out of it?
Like, is she going to be unable to be a mom to me in this moment?
Is she going to be functional?
Mm.
I guess I knew pretty early on she would probably have a very hard time with that.
So you mentioned that your brothers reflected back to you that you said, am I supposed to cry? What were some of the other initial reactions for you to his death in the couple of first couple of days and weeks?
Relief was the biggest one, probably, and confusion about being relieved. Um, my memories aren't really great from that time at all. I think my memories started way later in my life after he died, but I think just feeling alone. We did not have a family that was there. We were all supporting each other. It wasn't that we didn't, but there wasn't like a sense of family. But I do think I had more, like I should be feeling something that I for sure wasn't feeling when people are all saying how great he was. And so confusion, relief, I think fear of I didn't know how my mom was going to be able to handle things.
I know you said your memories from that time are not that crystal clear, but I'm curious if you remember anything about like the funeral or the memorial service. I've heard from other folks that when they had a conflicted or the person who died was an abusive person to them, they go to the funeral, the memorial service, and they're so public. People are looking at you like you're supposed to respond a certain way. And then people are telling these oftentimes glowing stories about the person who caused you great harm. And do you have recollections from that experience?
I think the things that I can remember are that we got to sit in front for some reason. That meant we were the most important ones there, and it was just bizarre. I think later, I'm sure when people were visiting, it was why was he so great, and why is everybody making such a big deal over this guy? And I don't remember being made to go to the funeral, but I knew I was going. I didn't have a choice. It wasn't open casket, so there wasn't that. But I remember just us going into the front, and also the fact that the four of us, as opposed to five, were together, and that was not that common for all of us to be together because of the age difference with all the siblings.
Over the course of your life since then, how would you describe grief, if you call it grief, and how did it change over time?
Well, I was thinking about that because I kept thinking about maybe it should be called relief with some grief. And that's what I was thinking if I was to title what how I felt, because the grief was more the loss of family and not him so much, or a family unit, which really wasn't there again because of the age difference. So I think what's changed is for sure uh, information and facts that I had no clue about in my early years that helped me understand more about what was going on in my family. And me figuring out that I had been abused really only happened in my early 20s because of my memory. So it wasn't something that I had ever gotten help for before then. So I think I was always just glad he was gone. I always thought he was a jerk and probably said that to everybody. I think nobody really understood why I thought, but now my siblings would also say he was not the greatest guy for a multitude of reasons too. So he wasn't this, although my one brother would say he was a great guy. Um, what's changed is information and perspective and understanding why I feel the way I do. I guess one thing that has changed is he did have some strengths, which I never like to admit. And I think my strengths are actually more of his. And because my mom, who's no longer alive, was kind of kind, great woman, but not a go-getter. Although, and my dad, I will never not do something. I'll try everything and anything. I think he did that. He had like 6 businesses in his very young life. He would just do things, and I think never give up. I don't know if he ever said that, but was probably part of it. Just so being independent and self-reliant. So I think I got a lot of many of my strengths from him that I don't like to admit, but I think it's true.
From what you're describing, Kathy, it seems like it's been a process of having to reckon with who your dad was in your life and maybe a little less about navigating life without him.
Absolutely, because life without him was way better for me, way better. I mean, I can't even imagine him being alive for all the things my marriage, kids, grandkids, that kind of thing. So truthfully, for me, I've always been, I just have to say, glad he was no longer my life and not sad about it.
How did that impact? I'm just thinking like, okay, I go back to a teenager who's grieving, a young adult, college student, early in 20s and 30s with peers, and people are like, well, what do your folks do? Or where do your folks live? And then you have to like, well, my dad has died. And then be like, oh, I'm so sorry. And they have a certain expectation of what that means for you. What was that like to have to navigate those types of interactions?
Well, I think as my friends would say, because I'm pretty direct, is I'd say, my dad's dead. I would say it like that. My dad's dead. And they'd say, I'm sorry or whatever. And I'd say, it's fine. I mean, they would, and truthfully, I think so many people, that's not really their focus, other people. So it's not like people were constantly, especially after years of having somebody die, would check in with me. But I would minimize it. And also, but not at the same time be able to say partly why I was so glad he wasn't alive. So I think that was, I mean, I would want people to intuit, and I might say something like, I don't know if I can say this now, but he was an asshole. That's probably what I would have said. He died and he was an asshole. And that's what I do say. Yeah, I didn't really ever feel I wanted even like condolences, or because that I want more understanding for what had happened as opposed to that he died.
Well, so many teens and young adults, and you say, oh, I'm sorry for your loss. Well, I try not to say that, but I'm sorry for your loss. I'm so sorry that happened to you. And they say, oh, it's fine. It's okay. And for them, they maybe it's just saying that because it's like not okay, but what else are you going to say? But in your case, it was okay. Like you were being honest about that. And so I can imagine how people may not have picked up on the nuance of the difference in your response.
Well, and I started doing this volunteer work with the teenagers. I had shared with the staff, how often do kids say, like, I'm glad he's dead? And I shared my personal story with them before I started working with them. And I had a hard time because the program that I work with is not a lot of feedback. It's more just listening and hearing. But so the opportunity for somebody to say what they didn't like about them, or they were glad they were gone, doesn't seem so appropriate or relevant to be able to say those things. So I think when I hear kids say things now, it's rare that I hear, I've had the kids I work with, the parent was a drug addict. That doesn't mean they didn't love them very, very, very much, but it was a rough time. And how they might share that information is probably not as open as I would think if their relationship was to them, because people are still grieving them. And of course, I'm not sure what that original question was.
Well, I'm just sitting in the space of, in our work, we're often inviting teens or kids to share. What did you like about your person? What did you not like about your person? And most kids and teens will say, I liked this, but I also didn't like this. And how there are kids on the extremes, right? That say, like, I loved everything about my dad. There wasn't anything I didn't like about him. And you might be over here on this. There's like, I can't really think of anything I did like about him. And to make space for that to be a reality.
Right. I mean, I think, in terms of nowadays people helping, you're not asking this at this moment, but kids versus when I was a kid, is if you're dealing with them like totally uniquely as one human being and listening to that person's because they have a different story than anybody else, and their loved one, if it was a loved one, not there may not even be a loved one, but they have their feelings about them are different, and so there's not one way to help anyone actually. And so I think it's more the questioning, being open-ended questions. So it's not like, did you like him or didn't you like him, but how'd you feel about your parent? Um, so, and I didn't hear a lot of kids opening up to each other really about the ones that I've worked with so far about some difficult negative feelings about the person who died. And maybe because of my own story, I would like kids to feel a little more open about that, or some way help them be able to do that a little more if it's relevant for them.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always so much social conditioning to overcome to get to that place if they do have things to share about their person not being all wonderful and good. Because there's such an expectation, right, that once someone dies, that we only say nice things about them, and kids are not immune to that social conditioning that we all experience. When did you first find yourself being really seen and understood in your experience, if ever?
Well, I think for me, probably when I figured out that the abuse occurred, things just made so much more sense to me. So I think and I was maybe 22 years old. So I think up until then, I think I just didn't understand. So the pieces of puzzle and how I felt about my dad then made sense, or so many things. Just when I got more information and I shared it with my mom and my siblings, I don't know if that I felt so. I mean, I was heard, seen, but not. I mean, the best they could do with it. But it just made sense. It all kind of it really helped, and it helped. I mean, I was doing social work too since 11, doing all sorts and helping people, and it made sense kind of why I'm so compelled, and why it's so important to see others. I mean, to really see them and hear them, because very few people do that.
So when you were finally able for yourself to name it as abuse, understand it that way, and then share that with your family and with yourself, that was when you started to feel a little bit more seen and understood.
Well, yeah, and then I'm thinking now, I mean, I work with children's mental health, and I worked in children protective services. So, and I can truly say, probably even till when I just started volunteering at 66 years old, I didn't think my grief with my father was connected in any way working with other people's grief, because it felt so different. And or my choices like to work in CPS or community mental health. And only somehow I went to camp last summer with all the teens and tweens. So I think that was the first time I actually related or thought maybe I could be helpful in a different way than I ever thought about what it's like witnessing them in that time period of all different kinds of responses.
What have you learned about yourself and your relief with a little bit of grief from being with those teens and supporting them in their grief?
I think what I've learned is I don't think they're seen or heard enough. I think they all have a different story. I think the sense of community to them is so, so important. So when I'd be standing in the room and they'd be like flying around the room playing, and that's part of the whole group therapy, just the fact that they were with other kids whose parents had died was probably the most important thing for them. Some of these kids come back year after year after year, and so even though grief isn't fresh, it's community again. It's community and it's understanding without words, and that they deserve. I mean, I think when I was a kid, it was so different. My mom took me to therapy, but it was not grief treatment, nor would anyone have said that. Nowadays, we're not perfect, but oftentimes, like these kids are allowed to see a therapist or be in group, and even ask them how they're feeling, because usually it's the focus on the parents, right? So in this way, these kids still get focus, and it doesn't go away right away. Um, and it's not just 6 months and people are out of their lives. So I've learned, the resiliency, but also the beauty in when they're beauty of giving them the opportunity to say things or talk at all different times. And some of the kids I work with, it's been like 5 years, or the parent died when they were an infant. And so it's just the fact that they're important, and it doesn't stop either. You don't stop the help, no judgment. And they're there for each other in their own sweet ways most of the time.
Most of the time.
They try, I think.
Well, I was thinking about this idea that when someone dies, we have to live the whole rest of our lives without them. And it would make sense then that the support and the community around the experience of living without this person could potentially be needed or continue the whole rest of our lives. It might look different, but to not just think, oh, well, the first month you get all this support and good luck with the next 5 decades of life without it.
Yeah, I didn't really understand it in the camp that I work with, and they have to limit how many years you can still go to camp, but how important it still is for so long, and how to keep helping when it seems like everything's fine, and everything may be fine too.
Yeah, it's not binary in that way, right? You're not getting the support just because everything's terrible and you're a mess. It's that you can be living your life and still need that touch point of being around other people who understand grief. What would you most want your 11-year-old self to know or understand now?
Well, I was going to say I wasn't crazy, but I don't know if I thought I was crazy, but just for my response, I think what I would tell my 11-year-old self, or an 11-year-old now, is that you're important, and whatever's going on with you is important, and it may be way different than others. I think just, sounds so trite in some ways, and I don't even like saying these words, trite, seen and heard, but because so much focus understandably is on a parent, that just, and each person in my family, like with 4 of us, we all had different needs, different responses, so that each human being be given, treated, heard, whatever is right for them, which to me is really not clear. But the only clarity is that particular person at that moment in time, wherever they are, feel like someone's trying to hear them and listen. That's probably what and even just the effort that, someone's asking me, not just sorry you're going through this, but how are you really? And you don't have to fake it.
How are you really? And you don't have to fake it.
And they mean it. We wait a while. They don't just say that and then they wait for the answer. Maybe even days or months, or they come back because you're not ready necessarily.
Which the evidence here, it's 5 decades later and we're having this conversation.
Yeah. Right.
I'm curious too, Kathy, if someone else is listening to this episode and the person who died was someone who caused them great harm or was someone who abused them, what would you want to share with them?
I think I would just want to share just conflicting emotions that happen, and if it's related, abuse related to somebody in grief or losing that particular person, you mean, that it's confusing and there may be all sorts of feelings. Also, that it really is okay to not like them or have loved them, and that nobody may understand that ever, but it's nice when people do. So I know when I work with people and there's complicated any kind of grief, because it's not just abuse, it's all sorts of things that, when you have mixed feelings, is again, it's just seeing the person as an individual, and there isn't only one thing they feel. And I do work a lot with people actually who've had abuse and parents die and what they deal with. And I don't know if I'd say I deal with it so much differently than whatever the parent did or whatever the relationship was that was not good in a relationship and somebody dies. A little different in some ways, but understanding and time and honoring. And I think honoring a lot of the negative stuff without, I mean, I know I spewed lots of stuff about my father through the years. I don't think people love that, but I like that nobody told me how great he was. Yeah. So understanding and how it's not binary. Nothing is.
To make space for those mixed emotions and to not have an expectation that someone's going to have a particular emotional reaction.
I think that's the biggest thing, because whenever, at least for me as a therapist or as a human, if I ever expect anybody's going to react a certain way, I really know better than that. And that expectation is not fair to the person, really, so and most oftentimes it's not what you expect. It's their particular own situation that is impacting them, not what you might think the reason why they'd be grieving.
There's always more to the story.
Yeah, way more to the story. Yeah.
Well, Kathy, thank you for coming on the show to tell us a little bit about your story and to, broaden our understanding of what it can look like for folks and kids and teens and their reactions when the person who died was someone who was causing them great harm. So I appreciate you contributing to our understanding of that.
Well, thank you. And I hope it helps.
And listeners, I say this to you each and every time, but thank you for being part of our community, for making the show mean something. If you want to reach out to me, you can email me at griefoutloud@dougy.org. That's dougy.org. That's also our website where you can find information about our local programming, all of our free downloadable tip sheets, activity sheets, and of course, each and every episode of Grief Out Loud. Always happy to share that the podcast is sponsored in part by the Chester Stephan Endowment Fund. Grief Out Loud is a production of Dougy Center, the National Grief Center for Children and Families in Portland, Oregon. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you'll join us again next time.